Well, you know, there's nothing like a fake car to make everyone happy. This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Eben Janssen. This show, of course, live broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with the entire show available on demand on our YouTube channel. On the show today, we look at the standoff that's developing between Woolworths, its shareholders, and BDS after an emotional and at times loud AGM in Cape Town yesterday. We'll get an update from Parliament ahead of today's special sitting there. We asked the question, why do some women only speak out years after being sexually abused or raped? That's a question we'll ask some experts a little bit later, and we'd love your views at SABC Newsroom, of course. We'll close the show with a look at some of the rare diseases that you should be aware of. But first, let's get the morning's news with Katrine Milan.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrine Milan, and let's just take a look at those top stories this morning. Australian cricketer Philip Hughes has died as a result of the injuries he sustained when struck by a ball earlier this week. Australian team doctor Peter Bruckner said this morning that Hughes never regained consciousness and was not in pain before he passed away, surrounded by his family and close friends. Hughes was only 25 years old. Then we continue with local news. President Jacob Zuma says the ANC is in trouble. He's further admitted that the years of the ANC's leadership failure to correct the wrongs of its youth is responsible for the ANC Youth League's current chaotic state. President Zuma was addressing the league's consultative conference in Soweto.
There are mistakes that have happened in this glorious movement since 2005, which must not repeat themselves. We as the leadership made a mistake by not attending to it.
Meanwhile, a report recommending sanctions against 20 EFF MPs will be debated when the National Assembly meets today for the final time this year. It had been expected that the report would only be tabled today, but Parliament's Programming Committee agreed to put the matter up for debate after a meeting yesterday. It was also agreed that today's proceedings will include a discussion on the issue of riot police entering the House and a snap debate on the situation at Eskom. The sentencing hearing of Dr. Wouter Basson continues before the Health Profession Council of South Africa in Pretoria this morning. In December, the council found Basson guilty of unprofessional conduct for being involved in large-scale production of mandrax, cocaine and tear gas and supplying it to Angola's UNITA leader, Jonas Savimbi. And then sure to be one of the trending topics on social media today, as ventriloquist Conrad Koch will oppose Afrikaans singer Steve Hofmeyer's interim protection order against him in the Randburg Magistrates Court. Earlier this month, Hofmeyer secured a court order against Koch, known through his puppet Chester Missing, to prevent him from harassing the singer on Twitter. The order prevents Koch from threatening, harassing or making defamatory statements against Hofmeyer. A dozen U.S. cities have seen new protests over the decision not to charge a white policeman who killed a black teenager in Ferguson, Missouri. Demonstrations from New York to Seattle were largely peaceful, but rioting broke out in Oakland, California. Meanwhile, business owners and residents boarded up windows and cleared away debris yesterday as Ferguson slightly returned to normal yesterday. This after 2 nights of violent unrest following a grand jury's decision not to indict a police officer in the shooting death of an unarmed black teenager, Michael Brown.
There's been a groundswell of outrage tied to a fairly long period of abuses, some of which are tied to police violence, particularly against unarmed black males.
Remember, all those top stories and more are all available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katrine. Woolworths shareholders yesterday grilled company chairperson Simon Suzman on the retailer's trade relations with Israel at its annual general meeting that was held in Cape Town. Questions were put to Suzman included whether Woolworths is absolutely certain that none of its products are sourced from occupied territories in Gaza and what impact the ongoing boycott Woolworths campaign has had on the bottom line of the company. Suzman responded that those types of questions were not relevant to the company's financial statements. The AGM was at times unruly as shareholders shouted, demanding answers. Earlier, pro-Palestinian group BDS staged a march to the Woolworths headquarters in the CBD, where some of the members said they would participate in the AGM and raise questions with the company. Well, we anticipated the severity of the story on Monday morning when we were joined by private Woolworths shareholder Martie Momberg, as well as Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions South Africa coordinator Mohammed Desai. Now today, Mohammed joins us again to give us the latest, as well as, well, representing a group of businessmen who hold shares in Woolworths this morning. Nadia Hassan, very good morning to you. And we're also joined by the COSATU spokesperson, Mr. Patrick Craven. COSATU has this year pledged its support for this campaign. A very good morning, and thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Mohammed, I understand you're fresh back from Cape Town at what was a rather unruly AGM yesterday. Just give us the broad strokes, how you view this meeting and what transpired.
Well, it was fun, and it was good. It was good for us, perhaps bad for the Woolworths management. They were exposed on several fronts, and they didn't see many of the questions that were coming for them. For example, we had found a loophole. One of their companies, which they've recently bought over in Australia, David Jones clearly stocks a very controversial Israeli soda maker called SodaStream, which is in complete violation of international law. So many of the questions that we posed to the management were either dealing with the financial statements or dealing with the reappointment of management committee members. And I think that the management really thought that they could have this discussion just under the general items. However, we were pretty much well prepared, so we could actually throw questions thick and fast at the management, which left them pretty flustered and embarrassed, but also exposed some of the mistruths. For example, the chairman claimed that he had been responding to all shareholders' concerns that have been coming in via email. And then Martie Momberg, who was present actually at the AGM, raised a hand and said, "Mr. Chairman, I've been emailing you for several weeks now and you haven't responded to not one of my queries." And so at the end of the day, they were caught red-handed. And I think it was a major leap for the campaign, because once the video recording of the AGM becomes available, many of our supporters and members of the public will see the kind of predicament that Woolworths is in, trying to defend the indefensible.
Nadia, now you represent some of these shareholders. I just want to point out to our viewers, before I ask you to respond to that, is that we asked Woolworths to come and join us here today. They told us we should send a camera to the head office and they will think about giving us an interview. I think it's for you to judge at home what that is all about. But we did ask Woolworths. They sent us a statement about last week's proceedings and not about the AGM, so we figured it was rather useless to talk about that. But Nadia, if I can then ask you to just, as the representative of the shareholders, the communication process with management, just give us an insight into that.
Eben, I think that the big issue is really that Woolworths is belligerent and hasn't made any efforts in terms of the overtures that BDS have made from the outset to talk about the issues or try and find a way to resolve them, knowing what the call is really from BDS. So I think in terms of yesterday's AGM, from a shareholder's point of view, it's concern to us. I mean, it's a win for Mohammed and the BDS campaign. But with all honesty, how can a chairman stand up there and bungle and not have an answer? This issue's been in the media now for some time. And it just shows that they've shown their hand. They're not committed. And I think that is the bottom line.
The shareholders said the first step should have been meeting BDS and clearing theirs up. Is that still your first port of call? And what has been the reasoning why they haven't met with BDS until now?
Of course, that is always the first point of any discussion. There's mediation, there's all of the normal processes that take its natural course. And the fact that Woolworths do not want to do that gives you the impression that it thinks it's more important or bigger than everybody else. And that is a worry, because it doesn't matter how many billion rand your company is worth. What really matters is your bottom line around ethics, around human rights issues, and the sustainability of businesses and viability of communities that support that business.
Well, that's a very interesting view of the shareholders, but Patrick Kasatu, you represent the other side of the coin in South Africa in a way. How do you view this kind of standoff that's developed around Woolworths and then the response from the management of this company at times towards its own shareholders?
Well, we fully support the BDS campaign and the shareholders. But I think it's important to remember that it's first and foremost a campaign against the Israeli government, against the military attacks on the people of Gaza, on the continued occupation of the West Bank, and the latest Israeli settlement, which President Zuma himself condemned yesterday, quite rightly. And we shouldn't just see it as a campaign against Woolworths. That campaign is part of a broader campaign of boycott, disinvestment and sanctions, which is in many ways modelled on the campaign against apartheid South Africa. And we should never forget that that was a very successful campaign, played a big role, and we believe this campaign can do the same. And it isn't just targeting Woolworths. We've said that there should be a boycott of all products coming from Israel. And so, as well as Woolworths, consumers in other shops should check the labels and avoid buying any goods which are clearly from Israel. But I think Woolworths have certainly put themselves in the headlines because of their belligerent attitude. What we're asking of Woolworths is simply to take a stand, which will cost them next to nothing, because as I understand it, the quantity of goods coming from Israel is relatively small, but would gain enormous public relations benefits, whereas in fact their current stance is doing exactly the opposite. They've made the same mistake as Cell C when somebody put up a big poster. They're forgetting the old rule that the customer is always right. And in this case, the customers who are refusing to shop there because they will not refuse to stock Israeli goods are people who they should be trying to win back rather than alienating even further. And
these days, you know, in the era of social media, the customer has even more of a voice than they've ever had before. But let me talk about that belligerent attitude, Mohammed, that Patrick has just alluded to. Woolworths, or let's talk about Mr. Suzman in this case, who led the meeting yesterday. He was quite belligerent. He spoke about things that it's not relevant to the company's financial statements. What's your response to that and the attitude that underlies that?
Well, he seems, the chairman in particular, and the other board members as well, seem to be going out of their way to defend this trade with Israel, which makes us begin to ask questions. Why are you going so out of your way to protect a 12 million rand trade relationship when you're losing, at a very conservative estimate, almost 8 million rands a month? It just doesn't make business sense, neither does it make moral sense. But we also ask very simple questions. We ask Mr. Suzman that you are importing figs from Israel. We have some of the best figs in Prince Albert. Prince Albert has about 10 fig growing farms. Why aren't we supporting the local economy? And the management of Woolworths simply couldn't answer any of these questions and kept on evading them and referring them to the next meeting or to certain members of management to report back on, which are just delaying tactics. So it would seem as if Woolworths or people within Woolworths have a particular agenda in wanting to maintain that trade relationship with Israel. Mr. Sussman, in an off-the-cuff comment, suggested that one of the reasons for defending the Israeli trade ties is because of the kind of backlash that will come from pro-Israeli supporters, which means that Woolworths is taking a stand. Woolworths is taking the side of pro-Israeli supporters as opposed to the growing number of shareholders, the growing number of civil society organizations, trade unions, and activists that are calling on the company to terminate that trade relationship. But one thing that was very successful yesterday, Eben, is that we managed to actually reach out to some of the shareholders that were present at the meeting. One gentleman, for example, who wasn't aware of this issue, he came up to us later on and said that he disagrees somewhat with our position, but he'd like to commend the fact that activism and young people are still involved in these kind of issues. So that was some sort of positive feedback from the shareholders that were present.
Nadia, you represent the shareholders. Just give us a quick roundup of the views after yesterday's meeting, what the consensus were amongst the shareholders, and then if you can maybe map the way forward as the shareholders see it.
Eben, I think from the shareholder point of view, I've been mandated to come across quite strongly and to say that supporting local is really important. Apart from the issues raised around investing in Israel or anywhere else, it's a bigger issue of the confidence in South Africa as a country. And with more investment and more confidence in the companies that operate here and are listed here, that we should be more responsible. I think also there are broader issues in terms of human rights. And it's quite apt. This is the launch of 16 Days of Activism against women and children. And looking at the scourge that we just coming out from Palestine, 2,100 people killed in such a short time. And it was a targeted campaign at women and children. So for us, that is really, really an outrage, to put it mildly.
Mr. Craven, support local. That must really strike a chord with you, who represent at times the marginalised groups within South Africa. And by buying from overseas and not supporting local, those are the people that are suffering. How do you view this?
We certainly agree with that campaign, although I think it's important to separate it. To some extent, it isn't the same issue. We have long argued that the government removed protective tariffs too quickly and allowed a flood of imports, mainly from China rather than from Israel in terms of bulk. But that's a separate issue. We're not boycotting, calling for a boycott of goods from any other country. We're calling for policies which will, as you say, shift consumption towards a local produce. The Israeli issue is different. There it is clearly political and humanitarian.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's similar to the anti-apartheid boycott campaign. And that is why we are saying that Woolworths should not necessarily buy everything from within South Africa. We appreciate that there will always be products which we can't produce here. But that in the case of Israel, irrespective of whether it's economically, financially to their benefit, they should take a stand on principle in line with people all over the world who are saying the Israeli regime has now stepped outside acceptable norms of political behavior. And we've likened it, in fact, to the apartheid regime. We've called it the apartheid state of Israel because many of its policies are, in fact, very, very similar and require the same kind of international response that we saw to those policies when they were adopted here.
Mohammed, let's go back to the BDS campaign quickly. You've now been banned from protesting at Woolworths stores, if I'm accurate. Is this a court order that you plan on defying? And maybe you can give us the picture as to what sort of route you guys are taking forward from now.
Well, Woolworths is trying to, and in fact, even at yesterday's AGM, they're trying to spin it as if they've got an interdict against BDS South Africa. This is not the case. BDS South Africa came to an agreement with Woolworths, which was then finalized through a court order. We agreed that we want Woolworths to meet with us face-to-face on the 10th of December or before the 10th of December, which they agreed to. And in good faith, BDS South Africa agreed to tone down on certain protest actions, including protests within the Woolworths stores. However, this only applies to BDS South Africa, firstly. But secondly, the campaign will be intensified because the festive season is coming up, and this is a sort of soft spot for the company. So the campaign will intensify, but we are looking forward to a meeting with the management of Woolworths face-to-face. We hope that they will come there in good faith with the vision and the foresight of wanting to resolve this issue. But if those talks come to a deadlock, then we will continue with the campaign, and we will also meet Woolworths in court early next year. We do have a good team of lawyers, and we're looking forward to giving them a run for their money. Them taking us to court was probably one of the better things that they could have done for our sort of PR, because they really took this issue to another level, and especially in the arrogant way in which they engage with the media. They just refuse to give any sort of comment and thing. And in the process, we've just managed to get the boycott out there to many, many, many more supporters of the BDS campaign. Yeah,
certainly pushed it into mainstream media as well. But I'm telling you, you're going to need a very good set of lawyers, because I'm sure Woolworths have access to the very best themselves, Mohammed. But Nadia, if you can maybe just give us your final remarks as the shareholder representative, and then maybe talk about good governance principles for Woolworths going forward.
Eben, in terms of shareholders, the private shareholders are obviously comforted by the fact that the judge has ruled that Woolworths will meet with BDS, and that shows confidence, I think, in the importance of the call from BDS and for the shareholders in terms of ongoing profitable growth for the company. I think it's not only private shareholders. As consumers, we also all have a right. With Consumer Protection Act, it's around being more vigilant around labels, around voting with your feet and your money, and knowing where you want to put that money. So that is particularly important. And I think going forward, the shareholders are what has been interesting, I think, from my point of view. I have had numerous calls from other private shareholders pledging their support and wanting to get involved in the campaign or in some way show their confidence in that campaign to go forward. So really, from shareholders, from consumers, as a corporate company that benchmarks itself globally and locally, it's particularly important that you can't be a good corporate citizen and say that you're apolitical. You take a principled stand, and that is the basis on which we believe.
That is the world we live in today. Final remarks today belong to you, Mr. Craven. Please just contextualize this whole thing for us.
Yes, we must bring the debate back to what's happening in Israel and Palestine. That is the key issue. These are people who we've been supporting for many, many years in an absolutely justified and legitimate struggle against the occupation of territories, against military attacks which have led to thousands of deaths of mainly civilian people, women and children. It's an absolutely intolerable regime in Israel, and the world must unite to do everything possible to reach a settlement which is acceptable to the people of Palestine. And the boycott, disinvestment and sanctions campaign is one of the tangible ways in which ordinary people can get involved, and we would urge them not to buy Israeli goods, not to deal with Israeli companies until a settlement has been reached, endorsed by the people of Palestine.
Thank you very much. Succinct and to the point and at the heart of the matter. Thank you, Patrick Craven from COSATU, for joining us today. Nadia Hassan, who represents the shareholders of Woolworths, and then, of course, Mr. BDS South Africa, Mohammed Dasai, joining us this morning. And before we wrap it, I would just like to point out to you, we invited Woolworths, not for the first time, to join us here today, to give us their views and how they view this. But their response has been rather belligerent towards us as well, telling us that we should send a camera to the headquarters and they will then think about doing an interview with us. They will not come to our Sea Point studio to join us for a live link or even come to studio here. Sad, but that's the way it is, and that's the way that they're playing it in the mainstream media at the moment. Thank you once again for joining us. It's an emotive issue that all of us here in South Africa have a point of view on. Let's get your points of views. Of course, on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Tayop says, Woolworths' message is clear. They actually don't care what happens to the Palestinians. So much for fair trade. Hashtag boycott Woolworths. That one from Tayop. Bibi says, BDS South Africa is doing an amazing job with the boycott Woolworths campaign. Big ups to everyone involved in BDS. That's at Woolworths, of course. Yahya Campbell says, boycott Woolworths until the franchise cuts trade ties with Israel. That is at the heart of the entire campaign. Sarah Gaza says, the picket line versus the AGM. Never back down. Hashtag boycott Woolworths. Yes, it's a campaign that is all over the South African media at the moment. The African Kaiser says, so protesting about Woolworths selling Israeli products when you couldn't care about the Zimbabweans across the border. I don't see anybody shooting Zimbabwean women and children. That's at the heart of this matter. But those are some of your views coming in. Let's now take a look at the front pages from around the world. Of course, in Australia, it's a rather dark day today. They're asking the question, that's the Daily Telegraph, why it took so long for cricketer Philip Hughes to be helped by a medical team on the day that he was struck by a bouncer. This, as we now know, Hughes has sadly passed away as a result of those injuries. We go north to the United Kingdom. The Daily Telegraph there is reporting that intelligence services could not have prevented the 2013 Woolwich killing of Lee Rigby, but that internet companies should have alerted authorities to their extremist messages. And it seems like South Africa is not the only country experiencing power cuts at the moment. There, the Jerusalem Post says major storms are the reason why the holy city is in the dark at the moment. Yes, we're quick to criticize when we have no power, but it is a problem all around the world. We are battling to come to terms with energy and how we handle with the energy crisis on the planet. Now, before we go to a break, let's just take a quick look at what's happening across South Africa today. Here in Johannesburg, the ANC Youth League will continue with its National Congress at the University of Johannesburg's Soweto campus. Then in Pretoria, the sentencing proceedings in the HPCSA's hearing into the conduct of anti-apartheid-era chemical warfare expert Wouter Basson will continue. We stay in the capital. Stats SA will release South Africa's mortality and causes of death findings and also the producer price index for October. So keep your eye on that one. You're watching Newsroom. We'll be back after a short little break.
Enjoy your PlayStation 4 games on your smartphone with PS4 Remote Play. Don't settle for good, demand great. The new Sony Xperia Z3 series.
Get the new Sony Xperia Z3 Compact on a My MTN Choice 100 contract for only $399 and get a free 12-month music streaming subscription.
Our new waterproof smartphone takes superior photos even in low light. Has PlayStation 4 Remote Play and up to 2 days battery life. Don't settle for good, demand great. The new Sony Xperia Z3 series.
SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom here on SABC News. The Powers and Privileges Committee report recommending sanctions against 20 EFF MPs and the crisis at Eskom will be debated in the National Assembly today. This after the National Assembly's Programme Committee agreed on what should be placed on the programme for today's sitting. The Assembly is reconvening after Speaker Baleka Mbete called MPs back to conclude the business of the Assembly before Parliament goes into recess. The Programme Committee will meet again this morning to give assurance that riot police won't be brought into the House during this afternoon's sitting. Now, our very own parliamentary reporter, Bulelani Phillip, joins us from our studios at Parliament in Cape Town. Very good morning to you, Bulelani.
Good morning to you, Eben, and to the viewers.
Is it going to be another interesting and hectic day in Parliament today? And are we going to need the riot police, Bulelani?
Well, Eben, the scenes that we saw yesterday in the programming committee do suggest that perhaps this afternoon sitting will be another robust debate. And perhaps maybe there will be points of contention that will lead the House to have some sort of rumblings. From what we know is that one of the major issues that are up for debate in the sitting this afternoon is the report that is recommending the disciplining or sanctioning of EFF MPs, 6 of them being suspended for 30 days without pay, another 6 for suspended for 14 days without pay, and the remainder of their 20 EFF MPs to issue verbal apologies to the House. So that debate has been, being delayed for tabling in the House because political parties have been trying to find each other in terms of how they can proceed against that. Of course, early last week, the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, reached an agreement with opposition parties to say that report must be held in abeyance in order to try and restore order and the decorum of the House. Of course, the DA later on tabled a motion that wanted to censure the President Jacob Zuma, which then led to that particular agreement falling off the shelf. So given that agreement falling flat, that report of the EFF Disciplinary Committee will now be tabled in Parliament. Of course, opposition parties are opposed to that report coming to Parliament on this special sitting. They say that in addition and over and above that, the President should be recalled to Parliament to come and answer questions which were disrupted in August.
Why are political parties also demanding the President to address them today?
Well, that momentum or that campaign has been gaining momentum given that they argue that in terms of Rule 111 of the Rules of the National Assembly, the President is required to answer at least one session of parliamentary questions per term. And I would recall the last time he was here in the National Assembly on the 21st of August, his oral session and reply session was disrupted, and that's House sitting had to be adjourned. Now, subsequent to that, we've now entered the second term of this parliamentary session, and they argue, as I've said earlier, that he is required in terms of the rules to come back to Parliament and answer questions. Now, we've seen in the past that the National Assembly Speaker as well as the ANC have been saying that the President cannot be coming to Parliament to answer questions under the current climate. They want the assurance that when he does eventually come, that there will be no heckling or disruptions of his oral reply sessions. But of course, on the other hand, the oppositions are saying that this thing of him wanting the assurance before he can come to Parliament is not in keeping with the parliamentary processes, given that they want him to come whether there is an assurance or not. Because if that is his argument, then we might find a situation in future where he does not come and address SONA, given that there will be no assurances that will be given at that time. So that is a matter that we are going to see this afternoon quite strongly, that opposition parties will be moving or arguing that the President has actually, contravened some of the rules of the National Assembly. Of course, what we saw yesterday in the programming committee, the opposition parties are now moving a step further to say the National Assembly Speaker should be actually thinking of measures to censure or to sanction the President, given that, he has not fulfilled this obligation of coming to answer questions during this term.
Bulelani, thank you for that update. That's our parliamentary reporter, Bulelani Phillip, joining us live from Parliament. Of course, the Powers and Privileges Committee report recommending sanctions against 20 EFF members will be debated in Parliament a little bit later. It's going to be heated. You can watch all of that all the highlights from that on this very channel throughout the rest of the day. They'll also be discussing the crisis at Eskom. Now, it's a rather sad and dark day in Australia today. The Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, has paid tribute to cricket star Philip Hughes, who has died of a head injury in a Sheffield Shield match at the Sydney Cricket Ground on Tuesday. In a statement, Abbott said his death is a very sad day for cricket and a heartbreaking day for his family. What happened has touched millions of Australians and others around the world. For a young life to be cut short playing the national game of Australia seems a shocking aberration, said Prime Minister Tony Abbott. Well, tributes have been pouring in for Phil Hughes on all social media platforms all around the world. Let's take a look at what you've been saying on this and, of course, what some of the more famous names have been saying. Our very own Test captain, Hashim Amla, such sad news to wake up to. My deepest, most sincere condolences to Phil Hughes' family and friends. Heartfelt there from the South African Test captain. Just Protea, so sad to hear about the passing of Phil Hughes. Also thinking about Sean Abbott. Yes, Sean Abbott is the man who bowled that fateful delivery that took the life of Phil Hughes. Brian Abana says, heartbreaking to hear Phil Hughes' passing. A very sad day for the sporting community. May he rest in peace. Hashtag gone too soon. I like that. Mark Lewis says, condolences to the family of Phil Hughes and all his teammates at Cricket Australia. Tragic thoughts too with the poor bowler. Rest in peace, Philip Hughes. Yes, that is a view of all of us around the world, especially the cricket-loving nation that South Africa is. Well, a short while ago, actually minutes ago, Australian Test captain Michael Clarke read out the family statement posted on Cricket Australia's website. Let's have a look at what the Australian Test captain had to say.
This statement is on behalf of Greg, Virginia, Jason and Megan Hughes. We're devastated by the loss of our much-loved son and brother Philip. It's been a very difficult few days. We appreciate all the support we have received from family, friends, players, Cricket Australia and the general public. Cricket was Philip's life and we as a family shared that love of the game with him. We would like to thank all the medical and nursing staff at St Vincent's Hospital and Cricket New South Wales medical staff for their great efforts with Philip. We love you.
It is a very sad day. Yes, we have a very, very, very vibrant rivalry with Australia. But today, we are with you, Australia. We support you during this very difficult time. Losing one of your very, very best young, talented players was going to probably play in the World Cup there in Australia in a couple of months' time. But let's have a look at what's on our Facebook page right now. Today you will see there that it's been revealed in the 2013-14 audit outcomes that government departments are using exorbitant amounts of money on consultants to prepare their annual financial statements. It was also revealed that only 15% of government's total expenditure achieves clean audit outcomes. Then you'll see Namibian opposition parties are heading to the Supreme Court of Appeal, the High Court ruling that dismissed the application for Friday's election to be postponed. And the Powers and Privileges Committee report recommending sanctions against 20 EFF MPs, and the current crisis at Eskom will be debated in the National Assembly today. All of those stories and a whole lot more, of course, on that page you see on your screen. That's the Newsroom Facebook page. We keep you updated there all the time. If you are more and more detail, sabc.co.za/news. That's where you get all the updates all of the time. Time for us to take another break. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News.
Hello and welcome back. You're with Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just recap the news headlines this morning. Australian cricketer Philip Hughes has died as a result of the injuries he sustained when he was struck by a ball earlier this week. Australian team Dr. Peter Bruckner said this morning that Hughes never regained consciousness and was not in pain before he passed away, surrounded by his family and close friends. Hughes was only 25 years old. Back with local news, President Jacob Zuma says the ANC is in trouble. He's further admitted that years of the ANC's leadership's failures to correct the wrongs of its youth is responsible for the ANC Youth League's current chaotic state. President Zuma was addressing the league's consultative conference in Soweto. Meanwhile, a report recommending sanctions against 20 EFF MPs will be debated when the National Assembly meets today for the final time this year. It had been expected that the report would only be tabled today, but Parliament's Programming Committee agreed to put the matter up for debate after a meeting yesterday. It was also agreed that today's proceedings will include a discussion on the issue of riot police entering the House and a snap debate on the situation at Eskom. I'll remember all those top stories and more are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katrina. Now, it seems like the list of women who claim the American comedian Bill Cosby sexually assaulted or raped them is getting longer and longer by the day. More than a dozen women now have come forward in recent weeks to accuse Cosby of sexually assaulting them years ago. But why are so many of these women only speaking out now? As we in South Africa currently focus on fighting gender violence during the 16 Days of Activism campaign, we also ask, why are women keeping quiet after being raped or assaulted? And to talk to us about the importance of speaking out, we are joined from Cape Town by the Rape Crisis Trust Director, Kathleen Day. A very good morning, Kathleen. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Eben. Morning.
I'd hate to start with the Bill Cosby case, but we're dealing with the speaking out scenario. How do you view that, and why do we battle with victims coming forward?
I think rape is one of the most difficult crimes to actually come forward and report. It's talking about something that's very intimate, very personal, very sexual, for some people very taboo. To come and talk about that publicly is very, very difficult. And obviously, if you're going to be reporting something as a crime, you're going to have to speak to officials, you're going to have to speak out in court, and that can be extremely frightening, as well as exposing what's happened to your family and exposing them to the pain of what's happened to you.
Now Kathleen, in some cases, victims are paid off, and we've seen this playing out in the Bill Cosby scenario. Some are paid off or paid for their silence. If you get paid for your silence, are you then also not guilty in this case?
No, not under South African law. Our law states that if you are coerced into having sex with somebody, and there are a number of ways that that can happen, either through somebody using their position of power to coerce you into doing something, tricking you, using false pretenses, putting you into a state of unconsciousness. There are all kinds of ways in which people can be coerced into having sex. And then, of course, there are all kinds of ways in which the person who's trying to get away with doing that will try to coerce you, through bribing your family, through intimidation, through threats. There are all kinds of ways in which perpetrators of sexual crimes try to get away with what they've done.
Kathleen, how common is it here in South Africa for victims to remain quiet and not say anything after a sexual assault or rape?
I think it's very common. Studies that have been done by the Medical Research Council have shown that actually only 1 in 13 rape victims will report their crime officially. It's probably a little bit higher that people would disclose that to their families. But because of the barriers that I mentioned earlier, and also because of a lack of faith in our criminal justice system, I think it is very common. And what that means is that our official reported rape statistics are actually 13 times lower than they should be. And so that makes it very difficult for us to mobilize the kind of resources that are needed to deal with a problem like this.
And we're in the 16 Days of Activism campaign now. How effective are these types of campaigns, and the Speaking Out campaign for that matter, in dealing with the problem that we have?
Well, I think because so many people keep silent about it, it's tempting for society in general to put it out of our minds and not to think about it. It's a very difficult thing to contemplate. And because people are not voicing their opinions about it all of the time, it's very easy to set it aside and not think of it as a problem. So campaigns like this one, which encourage people to speak out and to focus on it over the period of 16 days, are incredibly important at making people remember and making people feel the extent of the problem in the country.
Finally, what's your message to victims, and where can women around the country go to get help?
Well, women should feel safe in their communities, in their homes, in their workplaces, in their schools. And it's a right that's enshrined in our Constitution that we should live free from violence. And I think it's a job of every citizen in South Africa and every person living in South Africa to speak out and to demand that right. And people that have been raped and that are in need of services can contact organizations like Rape Crisis. If you look at our website, it'll be rapecrisis.org.za. And there we're also speaking out about our campaign during the 16 days of activism and how you can get involved.
Kathleen, thank you very much for joining us today. Of course, it's 16 days of activism of, well, no violence against women and children. It seems as if we don't ever heed this call, but still we have to continue this fight. That was Rape Crisis Trust Director Kathleen Day coming to us live from Cape Town. Now, Anine is looking at rare diseases that you should be aware of to conclude today's proceedings. Thanks, Anine.
Yes, thank you, Eben. Actually, November is Parliamentary Hypertension Awareness Month. Now, this is a rare disease that, if left undiagnosed, only leaves most patients with 2 years to live. To talk a bit more about the life-threatening disease, we're joined today by founder and chairperson of the Rare Disease Society of South Africa, Kelly du Plessis, and by vice chairperson of Parliamentary Hypertension South Africa, Sumaya Kola. Ladies, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
Kelly, if I can start with you, just talk to us about this disease. What exactly is it?
Pulmonary hypertension is basically the same as hypertension in the heart. It is a restriction or narrowing or blockage of the arteries in the lungs. And basically, as a result, the same amount of blood gets forced through a much smaller artery, and it results in hypertension in the lungs.
And Sumaya, you were actually born with the disease. Just tell us a bit about your journey.
Yes, okay. I was born with a hole in my heart called an aortopulmonary window, which was repaired when I was 6 months old. At the age of 14, they found out that I have pulmonary hypertension, secondary to the AP window that was repaired, apparently reopened somewhere between the time I was born and the time I was 14 years old. And it was quite severe at the time, so they declared me inoperable. And basically, it's when I was diagnosed at that time, the doctors told me I would be lucky if I saw my 20th birthday. And praise to God, I'm 26 at the moment. And it's been, I'm not going to say it's been an easy journey. It hasn't been an easy journey at all. Especially within the last 3 years, where in 2012 I had to be listed for a heart and bilateral lung transplant. So I'm still on the list for that, and just taking one day at a time. But daily life with pulmonary hypertension can become a challenge.
And Kelly, in a lot of cases, this is really wrongly diagnosed. Why is that?
Well, I think the symptoms of pulmonary hypertension very much mimic many other lung conditions. So, obviously you would think of the more common stuff. Doctors generally tend to think of things such as asthma, etc. And it's generally only when treatments are ineffective for those more common conditions that, more investigations are done. And I think if I can, just mention to the public that I think one of the biggest differences is the chronic fatigue that you experience with pulmonary hypertension. So if you are somebody that is out there that is battling to breathe, you're constantly suffering from shortness of breath, and you're suffering from chronic fatigue, something simple like walking up a flight of stairs for a pulmonary hypertension patient is like life-threatening. Like, they walk, by the time they get to the top, they're ready to pass out because there's just no oxygen moving through their lungs. So if you are somebody out there that is experiencing those sort of symptoms, go to your doctor and say, listen, I don't actually think that the current treatment for the asthma is working, or whatever the case is, and, do you think it's possible for us to start looking at something more?
And you mentioned earlier, it's actually kind of like breathing through a straw. That's how you will be struggling?
Correct. It's one of the challenges is, breathe through a straw challenge. Is that something that we always ask people who ask, what's it like to live with pulmonary hypertension? If you block your nose and breathe through a straw for 5 minutes, that's what they feel like all the time, purely because there's just a lack of oxygen moving through their veins. So, you have that shortness of breath. They often are quite blue around the mouth, and they have And, the chronic fatigue, like I said, those I think are the three sort of main symptoms that are recognizable.
And then just currently in South Africa, if we look at statistics, how many people have been diagnosed with this?
So we're sitting with about 250 patients, obviously more coming forward every single day, and there isn't an up-to-date registry, so which makes it difficult. But from a population point of view, it is definitely a lot more common. We should be sitting with thousands of patients, not only hundreds. So there's definitely an underdiagnosis in South Africa.
And then, Sumaya, where did you go to get help eventually at the end of the day? And what do you encourage and say to people who think that they might be struggling with this?
Eventually, I came into contact with the Pulmonary Hypertension Association internationally, and they referred me to the Pulmonary Hypertension Association in South Africa, which was founded by a lady named Sharon Chetty, which sadly passed away in 2009. And I found tremendous help. And I came into contact with many other patients, and we've been on this journey together, which has helped, because when you initially diagnose, because it's so rare, it becomes a very lonely experience, and patients become overwhelmed and sad, and they don't know how to deal with it. And when you have others that are going through the same situation, you can connect, and you understand that yes, it's very severe and it's terminal illness, but there's hope. Yes. There's always hope.
Definitely. And we do have your details here in South Africa, so we will make sure that we put all of that up onto our Newsroom Facebook page and onto our website. Ladies, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Eben, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anine. It is a rather sad day for cricket-loving South Africa and Australia today. Our thoughts are with a young man who passed away this morning. His name is Philip Hughes. He's one of the best young opening batsmen in the world. He was struck by a bouncer and passed away this morning in a Sydney hospital. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following morning. We're also streaming live on YouTube at that time, with the whole show available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.